They were curiosities, playthings of bigger powers. Now, from that pained past, out of the grim years of colonization, occupation and war, from the fierce crucible of conflict and struggle, they've emerged, tempered hard. They're a new economic force in the world, sacrificing leisure and liberties for future prosperity. Taking a region on a roller coaster ride to unimaginable wealth and power. They are the mini-dragons. Taiwan, just half the size of Tasmania, but an economic superpower. A model for and epitome of the mini-dragons. Without fanfare, it has amassed foreign currency reserves second only to Japan. And with just 19.5 million people, has built a $17 billion a year trade surplus. But with the success has come political upheaval and economic changes that threaten everything. And outside looking in, are powerful neighbours jealous of the prosperity. Taiwan's problems are shared by Hong Kong, Singapore and South Korea, the other mini-dragons. Over the next month, we'll look at how each achieved its staggering success and how each, in its way, is now paying a price. And we'll show how their road to riches is being copied so well by neighbours that East Asia is being touted as the world's next economic superpower. We'll look at Singapore, third world sweatshop one day, world financial centre the next. A place now boisterously embracing a high-tech future and a government unashamedly trying to ensure it by intruding into every facet of people's lives.
Where is my dream gone?
Where's the man of my dreams?
Why not reality? You could wait a lifetime for a dream.
Hong Kong, and hovering over this, one of the world's best-known skylines, is the shadow of 1997, when Hong Kong is to revert to Chinese ownership. A showpiece of capitalism to be engulfed by a remnant of communism. We'll see how, in some of Hong Kong's more glamorous industries, the attitude is get rich and get out. How, on the high seas, it's pretend nothing's happening and it might go away. And how some see it as an opportunity.
What I wanted to do is probably...
We'll meet this most enterprising of entrepreneurs, for instance, who is personally bankrolling a 320-kilometre superhighway, and nothing and no one is going to stop him.
And the whole thing?
You mean the whole structure like you have it?
Sure.
The whole works?
Yeah.
That would be complicated.
Yeah, but that's what bloody engineers are for.
We'll look too at South Korea, the fastest growing yet most fragile of the mini-dragons. This is the image the world has become used to. A country tearing itself apart with ugly street riots and brutal police suppression. This is the reality we'll show you. Little factories like this, doing their bit toward a trade surplus that's 14 billion high and rising. Koreans still protest, though, over their long hours and low wages, over the power of their multinationals and the military links of their government. And it could all still come unstuck. And there's the country which lit the flame of this new economic order. The country we'll focus on tonight. Prayers are offered in Taipei for an economic miracle. Because it's been achieved against all odds, it's a cause for thanks. And because it's meant the gap between rich and poor is smaller than anywhere on Earth, it's a cause for celebration. Taiwan hasn't always had much to celebrate. There are virtually no Taiwanese alive who remember the island ever being independent. For 50 years, it was occupied by the Japanese. Then, after the war, mainland Chinese took over, and 1949 brought Chiang Kai-shek. His Western-backed Kuomintang government had been defeated by Mao Zedong's communists, on the battlefield and for people's hearts and minds. But the KMT didn't accept Mao's victory, nor recognize his right to rule. Chiang, 600,000 of his troops, 2 million supporters and his entire government relocated to Taiwan. For the next 27 years, Chiang deluded himself and conned much of the world into recognizing Taiwan as the real China, he and his Kuomintang government as China's legitimate leaders. Australia joined America and the rest of the West in going along with the charade. Frank Yu is one of thousands of native Taiwanese who have profited from all that political and diplomatic upheaval. Frank makes tennis rackets for the West under Japanese brand names, and he's made himself a millionaire in the process. His factory turns out rackets that reach us with names like Prince, Yamaha, Kawasaki and Kennex. With not so much as a laver or Newcomb in its past, Taiwan has become the world's leading tennis equipment manufacturer, and this meeting is all about maintaining that leadership. For several months, Frank's been working on a new racket, using a carbon fibre technique that he's developed. The prototype is being shown to a Japanese buyer, and if an order is placed, Taiwan can reckon on making 75% of the world's tennis rackets.
That means very classical, but something different.
Tennis rackets are one of the 23 products in which Taiwan leads the world. If Frank's racket goes into production, it will be one of the most expensive on the market. The man from Japanese head office wants assurances there'll be no faults.
This kind of things will be that will not happen like for the mass production. Okay. Then let me use this racket to explain that those 20 samples I received, this joint part was not done very nicely.
When it comes to tennis rackets, it seems second best is good enough if the buyers are Australians.
The material.
But what I can tell is this, for like Australian market, European market is okay. American market maybe, but not Japanese market.
Japan always the number one.
It's a small fault, a cosmetic thing. But Frank will do the Japanese's bidding. It has been the way of Taiwan through much of its history. Frank's business, and thousands like it in Taiwan, have prospered from the American and Japanese orders that came when Taiwan was a buffer against the communism of China. They offered cheap labor. Their country got diplomatic recognition in return. That cosy interplay is over. What Frank has to contend with now is higher labor costs and client countries who fear China's backlash if they remain friendly with Taiwan. For now, Frank's factory is at Taichung, Taiwan's third largest city. But as he takes the company car home, Frank is thinking what once would have been considered treason, relocating his operations to China. More than 95% of Taiwanese are of Chinese extraction. Around 85% have lived on the island for generations. The years of Japanese rule and influence added a layer of resourcefulness to an already canny, mercantile people. In Frank Yu's family compound and those elsewhere on Taiwan live some of the world's best business people. As is custom in Chinese families, Frank involves family members in major business decisions. The move to China is one of the toughest they've had to consider. China is trying to diplomatically isolate Taiwan and eventually absorb it. Locating the factory there is giving aid and comfort to an enemy. As Frank and his wife practice the religion that would be denied them on the mainland, they realise an ironic upside. By moving to China, they'd be infuriating the old men of the KMT who still rule Taiwan. And Frank, more than most, has cause to enjoy that prospect. The film playing at this cinema is telling Taiwanese what really happened when the KMT came to Taiwan. The film is called City of Sadness, and Frank and his wife are on their way to see it. It's set in 1947, soon after Taiwan traded in Japanese occupation for what it soon realised was just as brutal KMT control. There was an uprising, now referred to as the 2.28 incident, meaning February the 28th. Frank's father was one of its ultimate victims. Local Taiwanese plotted to regain control of their island from the KMT authorities, who were governing it as a province of China. For the audiences packing cinemas to see this film, the response is as shocking now as it was then. The KMT sent reinforcements of troops with orders to put down the uprising, whatever the cost. 10,000 Taiwanese died. Thousands more were jailed. Martial law was declared, businesses nationalized.
Historically, the Taiwanese have never controlled their own fate. They have always been controlled by foreign forces. My father was like many other Taiwanese who worked hard running their business, but lost everything when the KMT took power.
This sprightly septuagenarian is a hero to Frank Yu and most other native Taiwanese. He has stood up, time and again, to the authoritarian rule of the KMT. His name is Tsai Chung Po, and here, 30 years ago, on the eastern side of the island, he built this factory. More importantly, built the hydroelectric system that powers it. The factory produces silicon, which is used by Taiwan's steel industry. When Mr. Tsai built his factory, there were 30 others in private hands competing against state-owned silicon plants. Now, in the private sector, only Mr. Tsai remains. The state-owned and controlled electricity authority forced costs so high that only his privately powered factory was able to survive. Once a week, Mr. Tsai visits to oversee operations and to reflect on the beginnings from which he built what's now a vast business empire, and reflect on that rare victory over the KMT government. A meeting of the Rotary Club of Taipei. There are some 700,000 small and medium-sized businesses in Taiwan, and the Rotary Club accepts only one representative from each industry. So in this room is a Taiwanese elite. And who has just been elected their president? Mr. Tsai. One reason, his celebrated victory over the Kuomintang-run Electricity Authority.